At this point in our program, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker, Professor Mary Frances Berry, the Geraldine R. Segal Professor of American Social Thought and Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania. Like many African Americans born in the 20th century, Dr. Berry came from very humble beginnings. However, by means of her innate intellectual ability, her curiosity, as well as her tenacity, as well as the support of family, teachers, and mentors, she overcame much hardship to excel throughout her academic career. She earned her BA degree at Howard University, her PhD degree in U.S. history at the University of Michigan, with a concentration in constitutional history. She then went on to acquire her law degree at the University of Michigan Law School. Throughout her long and storied career, Dr. Berry has interspersed academic scholarship and service with an active involvement in the public service arena. Her formal career began just down the road at College Park, and I have to say that very often, you see things written as the University of Maryland, but of course, those of us here at UMBC are sensitive to this label University of Maryland because oftentimes people don't realize there's also other campuses within the system. While at College Park, she served as acting director in the 1970s as acting director and then director of the Afro-American Studies Department. Her work at the college at the university culminated in her becoming the highest ranking Black woman on the College Park campus after being promoted to provost for the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences. Soon thereafter, she accepted an appointment to become the chancellor of the University of Colorado at Boulder, thus becoming the first Black woman to lead a major research university in the United States. A short time later, her public service career at the national level began as then President Jimmy Carter appointed her as Assistant Secretary for Education, another first, the first Black woman to serve as Chief Educational Officer in the United States. As a result of superior service in that capacity, and given her background in law and history, President Carter in 1980 appointed her, and the U.S. Senate confirmed her to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, that governmental agency charged with monitoring the enforcement of the nation's civil rights laws. In 1984, following several years of service on the commission, then President Ronald Reagan, and she wanted me to say this, fired her for criticizing his civil rights policies. She then sued him and won reinstatement in federal district court. In 1993, President William Clinton designated her chairperson of that commission. After many years of distinguished service on the commission, Dr. Berry then resigned in December 2004, having served some 24 years on the commission. During her tenure at the commission, Dr. Berry was also involved in other community service activities. For example, in 1984, she was one of the founders of the Free South Africa movement, which instigated protests at the South African embassy in the successful struggle for democracy in South Africa. Of course, she was arrested and jailed several times in pursuing that cause. For her many contributions to scholarship, academia, and the nation, Dr. Berry has received many notable awards. Among these are the following: elected by her peers as a vice president of the American Historical Association, and then as president of that association, recipient of 34 honorary doctoral degrees, including one from University of Maryland, College Park, recipient of the NAACP's Roy Wilkins Award and its Image Award, the Rosa Parks Award of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Ebony Magazine's Black Achievement Award, the Hubert Humphrey Award of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and the American Bar Association Spirit of Excellence Award. and she is one of 75 women photographed for the book and national exhibition I Dream a World, Portraits of Black Women Who Changed America. For her many achievements and contributions, the Women's Hall of Fame named her one of the women of the century. Among her many scholarly works, Dr. Berry has published some 10 books, including the just published work on Power in Words, the stories behind Barack Obama's speeches from the State House to the White House. Other notable works include Black Resistance, White Law, A History of Constitutional Racism in America, Long Memory, The Black Experience in America, and Justice for All, the United States Commission on Civil Rights and the Struggle for Freedom, as well as My Face is Black is True, Callie House and the Struggle for Ex-Slave Reparations. There is no doubt Dr. Berry's record of achievement for scholarship, protest, and public service to not only the nation, but to the African American community, puts her among that elite group of African Americans who have followed in the path of W.E.B. Dubois in terms of both scholarship and service. She indeed has earned her place within his talented tent. For this reason, it is with great honor that I present to you Professor Mary Frances Berry.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was very nice. I'd like to meet that person sometime, see what they have to say. You have very graciously invited me here to talk about politics and policy in the 21st century. Does race still matter? I've had a wonderful time in the short period in which I've been on the campus, had great discussion at dinner, in particular with the provost. I used to be a provost, so I know how hard that is. But he actually has a sense of humor, which is important. You guys should take advantage of that. In any case, the point that I would like to make is that W.E.B. Dubois, who's one of my heroes, and the town that he was born in, Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which is way out in western Mass, for years sort of snubbed the nose at him because he was a radical. And they recently have decided to give him honor and praise and as being his birthplace. They used to try to pretend when you went there that he wasn't born there. You'd drive into town and say, well, isn't this where Du Bois was born? Could I see where? And they'd say, Du Bois, we never heard of him. But now they do. Leroy Jones, who's also called Amari Baraka, described Du Bois as the first voice of the 20th century Afro-American intellectual. For scholars and for students, Du Bois's life provides both an inspiration and a cautionary tale. An inspiration and a cautionary tale. He fought unceasingly for full citizenship for African Americans, from founding the Niagara Movement to leading the silent protest parade, one of the major events in New York in 1917, to maintaining such a radical stance in The Crisis, which is the magazine of the NAACP, during World War I, that the Attorney General seized one of the issues for it being too radical. Du Bois also joined a group of others in bringing We Charge Genocide, claiming all of the evils that had been done to African Americans to the United Nations as a first in 1951. He was a scholar, he was a social activist, he was a big thinker. He was one of the big thinkers in historical memory, but he's usually left off lists of big thinkers because the lists are ethnocentric and they don't have a place for him. He also made big statements, like the one at the 1900 Pan-African Congress when he said the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And as we enter the 21st century, the next words he said after that are more prescient. Du Bois said, the millions of black men in Africa, America, and the islands of the sea, not to speak of the brown and yellow myriads elsewhere, are bound to have great influence upon the world in the future by reason of sheer numbers and physical contact. His inclusion of people of color generally, as he did later also in the naming of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, is the demographic fact of the United States in the 21st century. It is our reality in this nation. Examining historic and present interactions between African Americans and whites provides an angle of vision for understanding that race continues to matter because racism matters. The essence of racism is color consciousness, which is a marker for social and economic inequality. Whenever Europeans have encountered darker people, wherever in the world, this phenomenon of color consciousness has existed, and it continues to influence race relations and economic opportunity and how we see ourselves and others see us. It is true today as it is at any time. I used to go to Japan every year on this long, nonstop flight from Washington for a board meeting of a university I was on the board of over there, UN University. And I took this trip, 6 years. I had to go over there. Actually, I went once a month for 6 years on this long flight back and forth over. And my colleagues in Japan told me the first time I got there that I should not go out on the street and try to get a taxi. And I thought, wow, I know that's true in New York City, but I didn't know it was true in Tokyo. And they said, because the taxi driver won't stop for you. So if you want to get a taxi, have one of us go out there with you, which I did. And I said, well, why is that? They said, well, because we reflect America's racism. We see it on TV. We know that the blacks, and we learn that, that African Americans are the subordinated people. They're the inferiors. And so you get this reflective response. People are acting like they know the Americans Act toward you. So ask us if you want to get a taxi. And that's what I did. And that's what I mean when I say, wherever Europeans have encountered other people, this phenomenon of color consciousness exists. And it continues to influence race relations. If you have a woman who worked with me in the Clinton administration, Maria Chavesti, Latina, she was explaining when she read an essay I wrote describing this. She called me up and she said, yeah, that happens in my own family, in a Mexican-American family. My father always refers to one of my sisters who's very dark as the little dark one. People talk about the fairest kids in the family as being rosado, which means pink or light. Everybody is conscious of color in the world, and it affects economic opportunity and how we see ourselves and others see us. We know when we come to discuss this subject of race that we have made enormous progress in this country on civil rights generally. And we define it usually in terms of achieving the goals of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution writ large, so as to include everybody in we the people, and to see that all men and women are created equal and given equal opportunity. And I hasten to add, because I'm always accused when I talk about racism of pretending that people can't do anything because of racism. Somebody always makes that up and puts it somewhere that I said that. I hasten to add that racism is not an excuse for people not doing the very best they can, and many people have overcome racism and sexism and all the other isms that interfere with what they want to do. But when we speak of race, we know that there are many racial and national origin groups and that they suffer discrimination. The immigration discussion that we are having in this country right now and have had for some time serves to demonize Latinos in some quarters. And Asian Americans are further demonized, really, by always being called the model minority. And people assuming that they all want to be scientists and engineers. And Native American Indians, we know, are not all owners of casinos and oil wells. And many of them live in dire poverty, plagued by alcoholism and despair. But fundamentally, the country's racial divide is about white and black as a paradigm. And that is what is going on in this country and has been going on. You know, in the 1960s, this question of race mattering, does what race matter, has been discussed over and over again. In the 1960s, with the civil rights movement, whenever something happened that was good, like getting a civil rights law passed, and then there was continued protests because people wanted more. After the '64 Civil Rights Act was passed, and then people marched and protested and went to jail and died to get the Voting Rights Act passed. But in the interim, once one act would be passed, all the headlines in the newspapers and the magazines would ask, what are they doing? Why are they still protesting? And after the '64 Act was passed, there was a big headline on Time magazine or something saying, what does a Negro want now? They called us Negroes. We used to be colored, and then we were Negroes, and then whatever we are. But anyway, they said, what does a Negro want now? And inside the story it says, you can sit down at lunch counters, now shut up. And so there's always people talking about, why are we still discussing race? No matter. And then something else would happen. So this has happened before. You know, does race matter? Does it still matter? Is there still racism? About 2 weeks after the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, came more riots. There were riots after the '64 Act in New York City. There were riots and others in the train in the 1960s, 1967 in Detroit, and over and over. And even every time something happened, Lyndon Johnson was so distressed in the White House that he had this meeting, I remember, after the riots, discussion of it, after the riots about what are they doing? You know, we've done all this, and now they're still saying that there is racism. And even today, when something happens in the last few years, when James Byrd was dragged behind that truck and killed, or when Amadou Diallo was shot in the vestibule of his apartment where he was just trying to go home, or when we talk about Sean Bell being shot, or the guy in Oakland who was shot by the transit officer, or whatever happens, and we discuss it, people say, well, why are you still discussing that in terms of race? There has to be some other reason. And there's always reasons that this might have happened. You know, maybe people were just tired, and that's why they shot you. Or whatever happened. Or they were scared and they shot you. Think of some other reason why they shot you. Stop talking about race. Of course, race is not the only cause of everything, but it is one of the causes in these cases. So we talk about disproportionate black poverty. People say, why are you calling it disproportionate black poverty? Why don't you just call it disproportionate poverty? And we say, well, there's disproportionate poverty, but there's also disproportionate black poverty. That's why we're talking about it. The question's always asked, why are you discussing race? And now we have an African-American president, a real African-American president, like Daddy from Africa, Mama American president, okay? And I was at a board meeting of a civil rights organization, a nonprofit board I'm on. I'm only on, nonprofit boards, 5 million of them, where you work yourself to death and get paid nothing. But anyway, but you're doing good. You're doing good for a good cause. That's the way you have to look at it. As Bill Cosby, my friend, always tells me, you're doing good, Mary. You're doing a good cause. Anyway, and at this board meeting the other day, one of the guys who's on the board, who's a wealthy investment banker, said that he was appalled by looking at the television all during the election. And one night he turned it on and he heard somebody commenting and saying that Barack Obama can't go to West Virginia to campaign. And the implication was that West Virginia was so hostile to this black man that he couldn't go. And so they sent somebody else because he couldn't go. And he said, the investment banker who was on the board said he thought of all the places when he was a little boy that he couldn't go because of his race. And he said, now the man is the president and he can't even go somewhere. What do you have to do to be able to just go wherever you want to go? And so we ask, why does race matter after all the progress we've made? That's the other way it's put. We made all this progress and now, you say it matters, but why does it still matter? Well, if you think about it, slavery lasted almost 300 years in this country. And notions of racial inferiority and superiority and potential and place are deeply embedded in all that time. In my class at Penn, we just last week were reading Jefferson's Notes on the State of Virginia, in which he was describing all of the inferiority of the black race, how our brains don't work right. We can't think. We have emotions, but we can't think about anything. We have sentiments. And he was describing how we can be in the heat and disease and we don't even die, you know. And then after that, they were reading this piece by a lawyer, Thomas Cobb, it's a legal history course, who wrote some 30 years after that a treatise on the Negro and his fittedness for slavery, in which he said the same thing Jefferson said. He put him in the swamp and he won't even catch a disease. That's the kind of thing, he is. And then I thought about all of those poor soldiers during the Civil War, African-American soldiers, who they sent out to fight in the deep swamps down in Louisiana, and how they died like flies from catching yellow fever and everything else that they weren't supposed to catch because they couldn't catch it. But these notions of inferiority and inequality, and some of the stuff in the notes on the state of Virginia and in Cobb's piece, were stuff you have been hearing in your lifetime, that I've heard in mine in recent years. Stuff about whether black athletes can run faster because they have some kind of arch in their foot or something. Until this white guy won the race and did the 4-minute mile first. And then they said, well, maybe there was a black man in the woodpile somewhere or something. We don't know, because the arch is supposed to be the one that did it, and we thought there was a certain Negro arch. And all that stuff being repeated over and over and over again. It's deeply embedded. It's only been 145 years since slavery was over. 145 years. And if you count legal Jim Crow and peonage, you have to go all the way up through the 20th century, and it's more than that time. And it's only been 45 years that we've been dealing with the notion of legal equality for African Americans. I mean, you think about it, Brown was 55 years ago. So slavery was 300 years in this country. So you have to ask, how many years and how many generations does it take to remove such deeply embedded notions about other people? Now, our board member that I referred to, the investment banker, somehow hoped that electing Barack Obama was the talisman, the magic that would do the trick. That electing Obama was going to erase all of that, and assuage all of that, and times would just be getting better and better and better. That he was the magic man. Well, what did it mean, the embrace of Obama on this question of race and it mattering? People voted for him for many different reasons. For some, it was a speech he made at the 2004 Democratic Convention when John Kerry was nominated. Well, remember that speech? If you were there or if you heard it, it was electrifying. He said something like, well, I say to them tonight, there's not a liberal America or a conservative America, there's the United States of America. There's not a black America and white America and Latino America and Asian American. There's the United States of America. The pundits like to slice and dice our country into red states and blue states. Red states for Republicans, blue states for Democrats. But I've got news for them, too. We worship an awesome God in the blue states, and we don't like federal agents poking around our libraries in the red states. And he talked about how we have Little League and we're all patriots everywhere in the country. So the point is that everybody is an American. And he said that is what this whole campaign is about, and that is what we're doing is about. And when he did that, and when he made that speech, and it was truly mesmerizing and electrifying, he became what I call an incipient race-transcendent star. Right away. That was Barack Obama's star turn. And in this book we wrote, Power in Words, that Tom mentioned, where we did all the backstories from interviews with his speechwriters and people at the White House, people in the campaign and so on, about what happened. They didn't know it was going to do that for him. They hoped that he wouldn't bomb in the speech. But he did a heck of a lot more than bombing in the speech. It made him into became a race-transcendent star. And after that, he reiterated themes of bringing people together, and their hopes and fears about race seemed to disappear. He seemed to belie the old inferiority, superiority paradigm. There were African Americans who supported him, who saw him as the prize that we'd had our eyes on for so long. He was the prize at the end of the struggle. No matter what he did, we didn't really care what he did. We were sure, but whatever he did would be all right. And all we wanted was for him and his wife and his children to be in the White House. And that would be affirmation enough for our children and for subsequent generations and for us. But other people had other views, and to them, race mattered too. Joe Biden said, remember Joe Biden during the campaign said, I mean, you got the first mainstream African American who's articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. The first one who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice looking guy. And then he had to go around explaining what he meant all the time. But we know what he meant. I mean, think about it. He meant Obama was good looking, and he was articulate, and he was clean, and he used deodorant, and all of that. All those stories about black people, you couldn't sit next to them on the bus because they smelled. That was what reason for segregation, and all the rest of it. Anyway, he was clean. He's still clean, as far as I can tell. And a nice looking guy. It's like a storybook, man, said Joe Biden. Harry Reid, he of the problems with articulation himself, said he was wowed by Obama's oratorical gifts and believed that the country is ready to embrace a black presidential candidate, especially somebody like Obama, and I'm quoting, a light-skinned African American with no Negro dialect. Unless he wanted to have one, he said. And so that really blew Harry Reid away. All those other black politicians, Sharpton, he looked like a Negro. And Jesse Jackson, he had a Negro dialect or something. And maybe he wasn't too clean. I mean, who knows? But there we were, and we all knew what he was talking about. And then Reid said he was convinced that Obama's race, being who he was, would help him more than hurt him. There were also people who thought, and these were some of my conservative friends, who said to me and to the press that we would become post-racial if we just elected Obama and not have to discuss race and remedies for race anymore, that no one would discuss discrimination or affirmative action or doing anything about any problem if we had Obama, because all they would have to do is turn around and just point at Obama, and that would be the end of the story, and post-racial America would immediately exist. And then Iowa and the campaign, where he went into white areas and won, reinforced that whole sense, that here was a man who was a magic man who had transcended and overcome, and race would no longer matter. I mean, race reared its ugly head every now and then in the campaign, not because Obama wanted it to. Hello. There was the Reverend Wright controversy, which he couldn't avoid and had to address head-on in that marvelous speech in Philadelphia. But there was also controversy, not about him, but to undermine politically the Clintons, who was part of the campaign. And nobody had really thought of the Clintons as being particularly racist since Bill Clinton made the Sister Soldier jam on Jesse when Jesse was running, and then went back to watch Ricky Rector get executed to prove he was for the death penalty. That was all during Clinton's first campaign. But the Clinton White House had been a place that was particularly receptive to African Americans. Matter of fact, I can attest personally to the fact that we were all invited over there so many times that we got tired of going over there. And many a night I sat there falling asleep and hoping the president would finally go to bed so we could get up and leave and go home. And one night I just told him, I'm tired, Mr. President, I have to go home. You have talked too long. Sometimes I think you don't want to go, just stay here. Just you and Hillary, just stay here by yourselves and keep having all of us over here tonight. And blacks, of course, were Clinton's greatest defenders when they were trying to impeach him behind, the Monica Lewinsky deal. But in any case, nobody had really thought about them being particularly racist since that first campaign foray. But then the word got out on the street, race got injected into the campaign. In particular, it happened inadvertently by the press secretary for the Obama campaign in South Carolina, who was talking about Hillary and Bill. And Hillary was jammed because she said something about Obama, that Martin Luther King needed Lyndon Johnson to get the Civil Rights Bill passed. And I was in New Orleans that night and somebody woke me up early in the morning. Come on, you got to be on the news and talk about Hillary Clinton said that they needed Lyndon Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Bill. I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, she's made that racist comment. What racist comment? She said that Martin needed Lyndon Johnson to sign. And I thought about it. And since I'm a historian as well as a lawyer, I thought, now wait a minute. Lyndon Johnson was the president. How do bills get passed? They get passed and the president has to sign them. I'm thinking that all the time. And then I'm thinking, because I knew this, that Martin was at the ceremony when Lyndon signed it, and Martin stood there and thanked him and shook his hand. So now what are they talking about? And so I said, I'm not going on radio. I had to find out more about something else must have been said. And so we, went around that for days and days, and it was mentioned. And then Clinton made some statement or something that they used. And so we had all this stuff about them. And then Bill Clinton called up and wanted to explain to me why he wasn't a racist, which I already knew. And I'm sure he was calling up everybody else and explaining why he was not a racist. Anyway, that little blip and the Reverend Wright controversy were the major race things during the campaign, but they got submerged. But that was a blip on the screen. In Obama's victory speech and in all the speeches that he made as the primary results came in between after that, he returned to the key points he had made in the speech in the 2004 campaign. We're not just red states, or neither red states nor blue states. Everybody is an American. It's one America. And that reinforced him as the non-racial or the post-racial man. And then when he was inaugurated, these expectations abounded. Everybody had poured into him whatever it was they expected, this magic man, this post-racial magic man, as Ella Baker would have used to say, that people thought Martin Luther King was a magic man, and he wasn't. But nobody was a magic man. But Obama became the new magic man. But his immediate problem was the same problem that all politicians have when they are elected. And that problem is trying to figure out what to do or not to do so that they can get reelected. I mean, that's the first thing politicians think about when they get elected. And what he wanted to do was to downplay race. And he did so. No targeting by race, even when it made sense, to answer queries about what he was doing about particular problems that beset one particular racial group, that a rising tide, whether in education, jobs, entrepreneurship, will lift all boats. So that is the approach that he took. Now, Eric Holder, his attorney general, got off message, as we say in Washington, from time to time, because Eric would get up and start talking about race. And he wasn't supposed to do that. And invariably, he'd get, into a problem because he was talking about it. And he was chastising the American people as saying something. But the president didn't on race. His comments that were taken negatively by people seemed class-based and elitist, not racial. He populated his administration and his two court appointees that called attention to Yale and Harvard and Princeton, and that made him appear even more elitist. But that wasn't about race. And you had, of course, the birthers and the Muslim haters who were out in full force. I guess they're still out somewhere, the birthers. The people who say he's not an American or something, he wasn't born in the United States or something. They don't know Hawaii is part of the United States. They probably don't know New Mexico is part of the United States. Dan Quayle didn't. He was famously in New Mexico one time and got up and make a speech and said, "Thank you very much. I'm glad I'm here today because I love visiting foreign countries." And then when people even tried to pull him down so they could tell him, he didn't know what they were trying to tell him because he thought it was a foreign country. Anyway, so you got birthers and Muslim haters in full cry. And some Americans were hostile from the beginning because they couldn't imagine an African American, whatever his origins, as president. And others became hostile and said he didn't downplay race enough, even with all the downplaying and not targeting and everything else that he was doing. With not serious problems, it didn't do him much good. It didn't insulate him from attack. Race matters also in the backlash against Obama and the Democrats in other ways. Some people believe that the Tea Party movement, which grew and became a force in 2009 and is now, is racist and opposes Obama because it is racist. And the movement says it really is against deficits and big government and stimulus and bailouts and all that. And the NAACP has a report on how they should get the racists out of the Tea Party, which is a mostly white movement. But the data on this, and it's always unpleasant for people to have to face up to data, but that's all right. We'll tell you about it anyway. We're at a university, so we can do that. While most Tea Partiers I like to call them Tea Partiers. I can see them standing around Tea Party. Anyway, but while most people in the Tea Party are white, there are black and Latino Tea Partiers. And the party stayed in the Republican Party, which is important, instead of trying to be a third-party movement. That's really was a smart thing to do. And that's because they plan to take over the Republican Party. Instead of making a third party, they said, well, why don't we just take over this one? And that's what they're up to. And they just elected 2 black congressmen who are Tea Partiers, Tim Scott from South Carolina and Alan West from Florida, to the House of Representatives, and Nikki Haley, an Indian American woman, a Tea Partier, to the governorship of South Carolina, and Susana Martinez in New Mexico, a Latina. And Sarah Palin, their uncrowned leader, I call her, is probably the most exciting politician, whether you agree with her or disagree. She's still funny right now in America. I think she's really funny. Yeah. She's dangerous, but she's funny. I love her when she says, well, how do you like that Hopi changey thing there? You know, I just love the way she tells things with a straight face. I wonder if she knows she's joking. But you can't tell. But the whole Tea Party movement extends a Republican strategy. Get this now. It's really extending a Republican strategy with these people they elected, I just told you about, the colored folks and so on, that started back with Nixon. Nixon decided to focus on Latinos, to get Hispanics who would be Republicans, who would then be part of the Republican deal, and to identify some and to bring them into the fold. And Reagan, in the guise of Ed Meese, who was his counselor, started identifying blacks who could be conservatives and who could be Republicans and who could be appointed to things and who could be gotten to run for things. They said, you know, the Democrats got all these black people. We can find black people who will be conservative. If they're not, but if we give them enough money, they'll be conservative and give them some positions and give them some stuff, and then we'll have our own black faces in high places. And so they went out and systematically got them some. And so all the Tea Party is doing is extending that idea. I published a post on Politico.com that I write for sometimes. And the question was whether the Tea Party was racist or whether the Democrats would gain anything by calling them that. This was about 3 months ago. And I said, there's no evidence the Tea Party is any more racist than any other Republicans or some other Americans. Although it might do them some good to talk about it strategically, but there's no evidence. I got all these people from the Tea Party who wrote me emails saying, great, you said we weren't racist, which is not what I said. And then I got all these people who said they were liberal people who said, we used to be your friend, and we don't like you now because you said the Tea Party is not racist. I thought, boy, what has happened to the educational system in this country? But in any case, the Skip Gates, and then later on, when the Shirley Sherrod case occurred, the black woman who was dissed, who was in the agricultural department, and oh, y'all don't know what diss means. You look at me funny. The black woman who was, they were less interested in the facts than they were in being afraid of Fox News. That was what it was. And they didn't want to have her hanging around to even investigate the story. And the minute I heard it, and most of us in the community, we knew the Sherrods from the civil rights struggle. I mean, they were big in the civil rights struggle in the South, in SNCC and everything else, and going back to that day. So we heard the name, and we know how Integris, as Jesse used to say, that means you have integrity. He called it Integris. He made up a word. We knew how Integris they were. And so we immediately knew that there was something wrong. And so folks tried to call the White House to warn them and say, look, guys, don't fall for the okey-doke. It's the Sherrods, it's Sherrods. But the young people over there had never heard of any of these people, so they didn't know what we were talking about. So they fell on the whole thing and let it happen. But anyway, that was an example of trying not to deal with race. When the Skip Gates thing happened, remember that? Skip Gates, Harvard, the whole thing, and the president had to have that beer summit or whatever it is. The president didn't want to deal with that, but he had to deal with it because it was Harvard and it was Skip and it was Cambridge and all the rest of it, and so he got all mucked up in that too. But the idea is not to deal with it. And in not dealing with it, didn't seem to help in the election we just had. And also the number of instances of threatened violence against Barack Obama as president have increased visibly over what they have been in the last recent memory for prior presidents. We get that, I got that on the authority of the people who do the guarding. And while race and post-raciality hover sort of over us like a brooding omnipresence in the sky as maybe an idea, and the president tries not to appear partial on race. Problems, of course, fester in this country. Everybody's suffering in this bad economy. But whether it's foreclosures or jobs or layoffs, African Americans still suffer disproportionately. And seeming valid complaints of discrimination are growing at all the federal agencies. College attendance and college-going rates are problematic for a lot of people, but in particular for African Americans. Incarceration rates, the school-to-prison pipeline is full. Dropout rates up, even in schools where they supposedly have school reform. And usually when I visit these schools, they don't like for me to ask them what the dropout rate is. They like me to ask what percentage of the kids in your class, since you now have reform, go to college if they graduate, because those numbers are good. But they don't like me to ask how many dropped out, because those numbers are bad. And see, I'm more concerned about the dropouts than I am about the people who graduated and went on to college. I'm just funny like that. And so I have to keep on asking these questions anyway. And we have a poor record for the administration on a number of things that we keep track of. Judges as appointments. Obama has fallen behind recent presidents, even the Republican ones, in terms of the number of blacks who he has appointed to federal court positions. And the federal courts, he hasn't appointed much of anybody to them. I'm talking about the courts below the Supreme Court. There are all kinds of vacancies that are on the court. And so race then not only matters, but it matters more, it seems, nowadays. It's as if in the African American community that the ultimate sacrifice that we had to make is to have Obama as president and let that be our prize. That's just it. He's the president, so what if all these other things happen? At least he's president. It's sort of like that's the ultimate sacrifice that we have to make. And so now we have to continue the work, working across racial lines, a permanent movement to put pressure on politicians, close gaps and disparities. Now coming back to Du Bois, he would understand what I'm talking about. And if we have any interest at all in being like Du Bois, instead of just talking about Du Bois or writing about him or whatever, we should understand that following his example means more than studying and being a public intellectual. There are a whole category of people in this country now who call themselves public intellectuals. I haven't figured out what that means. Does that mean being intellectual in public, or what does it mean? But they call themselves, and somebody told me I was a public intellectual. I said, really? When did I get to be that? I'm not sure what that is. But following his example means being more than calling yourself a public intellectual who writes for mainstream publications and graces an occasional meeting or dinner at the White House. It means a commitment to act for social change and to rub shoulders with activists on a regular basis and to rejoice when you're attacked as too radical. My whole life, whenever anybody attacked me for doing something that they said was too radical to try to improve the lives of people, I would rejoice. I would actually say, thank you, Jesus, thank you, Lord, because they attacked me. People say, are you crazy? Here these people are beating you up, and here you are rejoicing. I'm rejoicing because I'm trying to do something, okay? It also means understanding that Du Bois was not just a complicated man who had an inquiring intellectual and analytical mind and he became an activist. Du Bois actually taught himself to be articulate. He wasn't articulate at first. He could write and think, but he couldn't really explain anything then about it persuasively. And he actually practiced and taught himself to talk to ordinary people publicly with passion. He practiced it. Felicity, grace, and passion, because he thought that leadership required that and persuasiveness required that. He believed that there is a public debate about important issues and that it must be engaged. He thought it was too important for students and scholars to remain onlookers at what's going on in the world, because his whole goal was helping to, as he called it, raise not just himself, but the race. That's the way he put it. He knew that, as Fred Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. And so, indeed, whatever happened to the civil rights movement? Seems to me, a reporter asked me 2 days ago, whatever happened to the civil rights movement? It will have to last as long as slavery lasted, at least, until, as Lincoln would have said, every ounce of unrequited labor and drop of blood drawn by the last shall be met with a cleansing of the public mind on these embedded notions of race. Only in this way will race not matter so much, that racism hobbles people who are trying to get ahead. And if that happens, then we can truly achieve liberty and justice for all in our time. This is a work that must be done if we want a post-racial America to be not just a cliche that we talk about, but a reality. Thank you very much.